Welcome back to Hardball. Hillary Clinton today called out Republican voter restriction efforts in recent years. There have been a slew of new laws out there put in place across the country, including stricter voter ID rules, cutting down early voting, and limiting voter registration efforts. The effect is to make it more difficult for people to vote, especially low-income and minority voters in big cities. In other words, Democratic voters. Well, today, Hillary Clinton blew the whistle on those shenanigans, and she called for a 20-day early voting standard nationwide, as well as universal automatic voter registration. Let's watch.
What is happening is a sweeping effort to disempower and disenfranchise people of color, poor people, and young people from one end of our country to the other. Here in Texas, former Governor Rick Perry signed a law that a federal court said was actually written with the purpose of discriminating against minority voters. In Wisconsin, Governor Scott Walker cut back early voting and signed legislation that would make it harder for college students to vote. In New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie vetoed legislation to extend early voting. And in Florida, when Jeb Bush was governor, state authorities conducted a deeply flawed purge of voters before the presidential election in 2000. Today, Republicans are systematically and deliberately trying to stop millions of American citizens from voting. What part of democracy are they afraid of?
According to the Brennan Center for Justice, 21 states have imposed new voter restrictions since 2010. In 14 of those states, 2016 will be the first presidential election the restrictions will be implemented in. I'm joined right now by Michael Waldman, who's president of the Brennan Center for Justice, just mentioned, and Judith Browne Dianis, who's co-director of the Advancement Project. Judith, first question to you. What do you make of Hillary's proposal for 20 days of early voting for the states, every state, as a standard?
Well, I think it's a good standard. I mean, we need standards in this country. Right now, we have a patchwork of laws so that one state to the next, you're voting differently. You have a different amount of time. A lot of her agenda actually was covered by the president's bipartisan committee looking at voting issues. So that's important, and there are good things in there. Most importantly is she took it to the GOP, to their front doorstep, to Texas, where they have tried to disenfranchise millions of voters. And two is that she put this issue of voting rights on the agenda for this presidential election. So those are important pieces.
Michael, let me ask you, this is what you might call a gopher pitch in baseball, an easy one down the middle and high. Why do the Republicans seek restrictions on who can get the vote? Why do they want to reduce the size of the electorate?
I better not swing and miss, or I'm in trouble. You know, throughout American history, people who see change and demographic change have tried to stop the clock. And it's the rising electorate that's affected most by these various proposals. But they really have stalled in many instances. And what's interesting is we're now seeing in the states just as much new legislative effort to expand voting as to cut back on it. And that was a lot of what...
Who's doing that good stuff?
Well, you see that, for example, in the state of Oregon, just a few months ago, passed a law that was a breakthrough for automatic voter registration. Automatically, you go on the rolls at the DMV. And what Secretary Clinton did today, I agree, was very important in putting this at the heart of the political debate and pointing to some solutions. In particular, the universal automatic registration idea would really shift the paradigm.
How would that work? Would that be when you get your driver's license at 16? Or when would you, well, you don't register? Yes, you still register for the draft. Men do, I guess. When would you become registered under that system?
As I understand it, there are a lot of ways to do it, but you could make it so that you have universal, everybody who's eligible to vote is on the lists. The states already have computerized voter rolls. It's a matter of getting people on the rolls when they turn 18 and keeping them there. And that, Chris, would add tens of millions of people to the rolls permanently. It would cost less, and for people who really are worried about fraud, it would curb those opportunities too. It really is a game changer, and Judith is right. It's a bipartisan idea recommended in many respects by the Bipartisan Presidential Commission. So that would be a very significant breakthrough measure if enacted.
Is there any chance of getting that through in even liberal states?
Well,
progressive
I think,
states?
I mean, you know, as long as we don't get into the scary, you know, phantom called voter fraud, yes, we should be
Well,
looking
there has
at
been
ways
voter
to,
fraud. I grew up in a big city. Come on, there's been some voter fraud over the years.
but
there's
I
been
mean,
some in
it's-
Chicago.
it is
There's been some.
But it is so rare. And the thing is that we have the Republican Party trying to use fear as the reason, but really their reason is that they want to manipulate the voting rolls so that they get particular people get to vote and particular people don't, and they're trying to hurt people of color.
What did
and
Mayor
elderly.
Daley of Chicago mean when he told Jack Kennedy in 1960 on election night, with the help of a few good friends, we're going to carry Illinois? What did he mean? I'll leave that with you.
Well,
Anyway,
no,
let's
we'll
go.
leave that with you.
Yesterday, I interviewed
Remember, it was sort of machines, and it was the people behind the table, not the voters themselves, doing the fraud. So that's what actually has gone on throughout most of the history.
I agree. I think that's probably the case. The guys, the boys, as they called them out there. Anyway, yesterday I interviewed Mark Elias, a lawyer to the Hillary Clinton campaign and other Democratic groups. He's filed a suit against several states trying to stop their voter restrictions, including the state of Wisconsin. And here's what he had to say about a new law there. Let's watch.
In Wisconsin, as you mentioned, they cut back on the number of early days of vote, the time of day one could provide early vote, and they banned early vote on the weekends. Now, why would you do that? What reason would the state of Wisconsin have to say that people can't vote after work or people can't vote on a weekend other than to simply make it harder for someone to vote and therefore less likely to do so?
Well, the Republicans in Wisconsin had the answer. They justified that law cutting back early voting as a matter of fairness. They say people in rural areas in Wisconsin with fewer resources might otherwise feel shortchanged. Senate Majority Leader Scott Fitzgerald said, quote, "It's difficult for people to turn on Channel 6 in Milwaukee, and there's a shot of someone voting during a time when it's not available to people in rural areas." Judith?
So open up access to everyone. I mean, this is the thing, is that they can make up all these pretextual reasons, but really what this is about is trying to make it harder for particular pockets of people to vote. So if you look at North Carolina, where we have a trial going on in July, there's a law there that cut back early voting. 70% of African Americans used early voting
For souls to the polls.
in 2012.
And by the way, thank God there are Republicans in Pennsylvania, my home original state where I grew up, who are so candid about this, Michael. And Judith, here they go. Here they go. No, we got to watch a couple of these guys in action. In recent years, I said a number of local Republican leaders have let slip the true goal of their efforts. Let's watch.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
Do you think all the attention drawn to voter ID affected last year's elections?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think we probably had a better election. Think about this. We cut Obama by 5%, which was big. You know, a lot of people lost sight of that. He won. He beat McCain by 10%, and he beat Romney by 5%. I think that probably voter ID had helped a bit in that.
The law is going to kick the Democrats in the butt. If it hurts a bunch of lazy blacks that wants the government to give them everything, so be it.
And it just so happens that a lot of those people vote Democrat.
Gee.
You know, this sarcastic guy there from the Country Boys there. I mean, Michael, isn't it great to have people that are your best witnesses from the other side? I mean, geez.
It's like they were drinking truth serum, you know, before they went on. I say these laws affect people of color, they affect young people, they affect poor people. Finally, a government program that works as intended. You know, look, the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, very respected by both parties, found that when it looked at these laws, that they really did bring turnout down. And when you look at the Texas case, there's a voter ID where you cannot use your student ID, but you can use your concealed carry gun permit.
Wonder who that would help. Which party would that help?
But, you know, what's interesting, one of the things about...
I mean, it's hilarious. I'm sorry, we got to go, Michael, in this segment, but you're great. And you've come a long way from a speechwriter from President Clinton. You're doing great work. I mean it. Thank you so much, Judith Browne Dianis. Thank you all for coming. Two experts. Up next, the made-for-TV showdown between two political heavyweights in the highly charged 1960s. Gore Vidal versus William F. Buckley Jr. This is Hardball, the place for politics.